And now we're pleased to welcome Deb Olin Unferth. Deb Olin Unferth is the author of 6 books, including the novel Barney and the story collection Wait Till You See Me Dance. Her fiction and essays have appeared in Harper's, the Paris Review, Granta, Vice, the New York Times, and McSweeney's. She has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, 3 Pushcart Prizes, a Creative Capital Grant, and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. She is an associate professor of creative writing at the University of Texas in Austin, where she teaches for the Michener Center for Fiction and the New Writers Project. And she runs a creative writing workshop called the Penn City Writers at a prison in South Texas. Deb, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So we've asked you to talk about your amazing new novel, Barn 8, which has gotten these deservedly great reviews. But also, lucky you, to talk about what it's like to publish a book during a global pandemic. A traditional book tour would involve readings in different cities, hopefully paired with, like appearances on a local radio station. That's all obviously out. But what else has changed?
Well, yeah, it's been quite an experience. My book came out about 5 or 6 days before it really hit. So I managed to do my event, my launch event here in Austin, which was fantastic and so much fun. But then pretty much the next day, everything really started to fall apart. All of my events were canceled. Part of that was me, it was a mix of things. It was me being nervous about not wanting to fly to San Francisco where my first event was. And then there was Grey Wolf, my publisher, who wanted to help to cancel things. And also we started hearing from the bookstores and the festivals, just, one after another saying, we're not going to do this. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of a heartbreak. I think that one thing that I started noticing right away was the bookstores closing. And first they were just canceling their events. And then they were saying, oh, we're going to be closing to the public, but you could still pick up books or order them. And then a lot of them were just shutting down altogether, and workers being laid off and booksellers being laid off. And that to me was just this huge heartbreak, because the bookseller community is so vibrant and beautiful. And I always feel like it's about so much, that community. And it's not just about, oh, I want to go and pick up this book. It's like in this kind of box world that we're living in, increasingly, they are at the forefront of so many things that are relevant to where we are today. And there's such a strong independent voice. And each one is so quirky and different, each little bookstore. And so to me...
And you get to go visit them when you're on tour. I mean, that's the amazing thing about going out, is it Book People that's in Austin? Isn't that the one that's... I mean, they're amazing. And there's all, Lemuria and Square Books and all these. I assume that you were signed up to go to all these places, or many of them.
Yeah, I was going to go to a bunch of different bookstores. So yeah, it was just such a heartbreak to see that happening. And I mean, what's going to happen to these places? I'm so scared for the world after this is over. Like, it's going to be broken. We're going to have to pick up the pieces and fix it quickly.
So, I mean, we are doing this virtual book channel interview, and even before the viral outbreak, a lot of people were talking about how the traditional book tour was dead. People would go on blog tour and things like that. What are the workarounds that you found most satisfying, as you have experienced this heartbreak, which I'm so sorry about?
My publisher is saying, let's just try all kinds of things and just see what works and see. And so I have been, like last night, I sat in on a community workshop from Chicago that is, they're holding just online workshops of various kinds. And I'm going to do one on Tuesday. So it's just people from around the country just getting on. And then like we're doing this today, and I've got a couple more of these kinds of things. And I mean, so we're doing that. And then there's, just a ton of social media. I mean, no one knows what's going to work yet. This is just absolutely brand new, and we just don't know.
I mean, there's some of the same questions in some ways that we were just talking about with Rigoberto Gonzalez when we were talking about how teaching has adapted. You know, like, what is it? The online experience is so fundamentally changed. I remember reading about Margaret Atwood signing books with a virtual pen. Do either of you remember this? But, you know, Deb, I want to see you in person. I want the hard copy of the book. I want your in real life signature on it. I still hope that I get to have all of those things. But what do you feel like is the way that you seek to bring that kind of authenticity to the conversations that you have now?
I'm working really hard to be as authentic of a person as I possibly can.
I guess what I mean is, like, sort of, how do you know, like, have either of you been on happy
She's
hours
in the
on
middle
Zoom?
of a tragedy, you know? I mean, that's the thing is, like, I do want to say, like, I published, my first novel came out during the 9/11 attacks, right? So I gave a reading in New York that was really successful, and like my book hadn't been expected to do well, but it had been getting good reviews, and so my publisher bought like a quarter-page ad in the New York Times for 9/11 of 2001, right? And I was supposed to go do a bunch of signings at Borders, you know, that day. And I remember saying to my wife, like, oh, I think that could have, everything seems to be going just as well as it possibly could. And that morning, and then literally it felt like 5 minutes later, because of hubris, you know, her aunt, who we were staying with, stuck her head in the door and said, I think something hit the World Trade Center. And, you know, there's the loss of life, of course, and all of the terribleness of that, you know, is much more important than your private tragedy of losing your book tour. But I worked 5 years on that book, and you'd worked many years on your book. And so it's weird because you can't talk about it. I'm saying this for you, you know, in some ways, because I felt like I couldn't talk about it at the time, but it was extremely painful.
I cannot believe that happened to you. I mean, that is just crazy. And I mean, one thing that has really helped is that people have come out of the woodwork and told me stories like that. You know, in fact, Elizabeth McCracken, she and I went to see, you know, the last movie that we'll ever see in a theater together just before, you know, just as everything was sort of coming down last week. And she said, you know, I was about to embark on my first book tour on 9/11. Like, she was at the airport ready to go and had to turn around and come home. And she said, you know, I never talk about it, but it hurt. I mean, I think that honestly, for a couple days, it really did hurt. For a couple days, I was just feeling sorry for myself. But I got over it really fast. I did spend years on this book, and I did, you know, research the hell out of it. And but I mean, you know, actually, I mean, I feel good about it, I guess, because it got a lot of good reviews, and it actually went into reprint. Like, it went into reprint within like 2 days of publication, which, how can that not make you feel good? But now that, you know, the bookstores have closed, and I mean, I bet it's not selling as well, but I don't know. I moved on. I feel so much about, I feel so many things about the world right now. I'm so worried about the world and about all of the, you know, people, even just people around the corner who work at my favorite restaurant, what's going to happen to them. And I'm just so, I don't know, the gravity has overwhelmed my, my hubris, I guess.
So I do really want to talk about Barney, which is so great and lively and sort of like actually kind of the perfect novel for a moment like this. I mean, in the joy of the rendering of the characters who are, among other things, chickens, and the way that they're raised in factory farming operations. And it's a novel about animal rights. And one of the conversations I think that we've been having kind of ongoing on the podcast has been about climate change and about animals, and about writing from different points of view. Your novel's also about corporate malfeasance, and novels are, as we were just discussing, long-range projects. So when did you start writing this book, and what, if anything, in the political environment of that moment led you to these themes, which to me feel really correct for right now?
I guess I so I'm vegan. I've been vegan for a long time. And I think I just had this image of, I read that chickens were the most suffering creature on the planet, and I don't know, that I have a little bit of Buddhism in me that's, about life is, it's about suffering. And so, so I just started thinking a lot about the chickens, and I feel like chickens trapped in those factory farms all squashed in there, that, I mean, then if you think about us and how we're, you know, we also used to be nomadic, wandering, creatures, and now we're stuffed in our houses. And I don't know, I just started thinking a lot about the similarities between us and the chickens. And then I started imagining, what would it be like if all the chickens left the farm, if they were just able to just leave the farm, what would that look like? What would that be like? And once I had that image in my mind, then that was what it was going to be. That's what the story was going to be. And then while I was writing it, I had shown some early pieces of it to Clancy Martin, who Whit, and he said, the chickens, you could do anything with a novel, like anything you want. You can have just the top of the barn come off and all of the chickens just fly out of the barn if you want, because this is fiction, So I was like, oh, I've got to get that in there somehow, So it just sort of developed.
I was wondering if, one of the really interesting relationships in the novel is the, moving beyond chickens, is the relationship between Janie and Cleveland, who are the two characters who end up coming up with this idea of removing 1 million chickens from a factory farm. I wonder if you could sort of just talk to us about Janie and Cleveland, not give away too much plot or however much plot you feel comfortable giving away, and then read about them a little bit.
So Janie and Cleveland kick off the plot. Janie is, I wanted there to be someone in the book who could kind of represent the reader, like not know very much about the egg industry. I did a huge amount of research for this book. And most of the characters in the book are experts in this. There's a lot of undercover investigators. There's a lot of farmers. There are, there are people who designed the cages that chickens in. But you have this one character, Janie, who has left New York and gone to Iowa in search of her father, who doesn't know anything about chickens and didn't grow up in an agricultural environment at all. And she winds up getting stuck in Iowa for reasons that I won't reveal. And she winds up meeting up with this woman who, actually, I guess in order to read the passage that you're
going to have to give some stuff away. Are you okay with reading that passage? Is that going to be all right?
Sure, yeah. So anyway, so while Janie goes to visit her, she goes to meet her father for the first time, and against the wishes of her mother, and she winds up, her mother winds up being in a horrible car crash and dying while Janie is there meeting her father. And so Janie winds up having to just live in Iowa. So she has to abandon her great life in New York. So while she's living there, she winds up getting this job for the egg industry, where she is an auditor. She goes around and to different farms and goes into barns and looks at these, and she has to check and make sure that everything is according to regulation. And the woman who she winds up working with is someone who used to know her mother, and that's why she agrees to take the job. And her name is Cleveland, and Cleveland reminds her a little bit of her mother.
So we'll what we'll do is we'll just sort of cut this part right here where I'm talking to you like an idiot, and just you can just segue into reading there if that's okay with you.
Okay. Okay, so I'll just read you a little piece from Barney. So what happens, I guess I better tell you this part too. So what happens is that Cleveland is extremely dedicated to her job as an auditor for the U.S. egg industry. But she's become disillusioned, and she thinks that she's not being taken seriously. And so she starts, for reasons that are clear if you read the book, she starts stealing chickens out of these barns. And then Janie catches her stealing one and says, why are you doing this? And then they become this revolutionary team. So, and I'll just read a part after that. She and Cleveland began removing animals. They turned up long before dawn, hours before the first farmhands arrived, and hours after the last ones had left, when the barns were sheer machine and coo and fume, when the security lamp's glow was the only light on the land. Invisible horizon, straight roads cutting through the night, Janie and Cleveland pulling up alongside a barn, climbing out of the car in their auditor uniforms, which they wore at Cleveland's insistence. They walked through the barns, Cleveland recording in a wrath, non-compliances, jammed belts, crowded cages, a cat stepping along the aisles. If they got caught, Cleveland said, let her do the talking. Oh, by all means, said Janie. She'd love to see that one, worth the jail time. They hustled out a dozen at a time, 6 thin hens per burlap sack, took turns driving, tore away from the farms at 3 a.m, hens huddled on towels in the back seat. Did they talk about Janie's mother? Barely. Once, it began to snow while they were in the barn. They stepped out into a blizzard so thick it was like peering through white mud. They couldn't see a thing, not a road, not a building, not a car. Their flashlights lit nothing but snow. They went weaving off in one hopeful direction, then another, the sacks getting wetter and heavier. Hens could stay in the sacks only for a little while or they'd die. It had happened. Slush eddying under their feet, Janie cursing and shivering. Cleveland stopped, shined her flashlight on her. Janie Flores, for the last time, stand up straight. Your mother used to say that even the most humble job should be done as if for the President of the United States. Would you slouch like that before the President? Janie gasped. Her mother did used to say that. Janie threw back her shoulders. They marched a long way. They found the car and got in. Cleveland. There are not 2 sets of numbers, Janie, one for mathematicians and one for auditors of layer hen farms. Check your calculations. Her mother. There aren't 2 sets of manners, young lady, one for the Queen of England and one for little Brooklyn girls. Use a Kleenex. Cleveland. Roll up that window. How do you think these chickens like being blown around like lotto balls? Her mother. Shut that window. We are not lotto balls at seniors bingo. Janie never got used to the sound of the barns, the clanking machinery, the squeaking belts. Even the lights made a sound in these places. She'd start her long walk toward the center of the row, and the fans would give way to the sound of tens of thousands of hens, a sort of roiling, moaning, or droning. It reached the ears in what could only be described as layers. The shallowest layer coming from the hens clucking and ululating nearby, and the deepest layer a low cooing that rose from all corners of the maze. She'd look up and glimpse through the metal a second story identical to this one. She'd crouch and see the lowest tier of birds at her feet, she herself encased between 2 loud walls of hens, honeycombed in, hundreds of hens poking out at all heights, ahead and behind. She couldn't see the row's end through the haze of dander, the unimaginable scale, the tiny beside the huge, the existential power of size. Some farms had barbed wire. Some had key codes. Some had a security truck coasting the horizon. Others had nothing but a dented sign to keep them out. Cleveland found ways onto them all. Virtuoso at it, really. If a barn was locked, most weren't. She knew where the keys were. If she didn't, she'd look in their audit forms and in minutes have a key or a code. A glance at their audits, and she knew when the right night crews would be out. My life's work, Cleveland would say to Janie's impressed grin. Our life's work, her mother, head in a kerchief, leaning on a mop, joking about their Sunday cleaning. Janie couldn't believe the eccentric people who had made up her mother's early life, first her father and now this, and yet she could hear the echo of her mother's voice. The barn is the whole world as far as the hens are concerned, Janie. The earth, the sun, sustenance, rain. Her mother, one of her final voicemails. You're my whole world, Janie. My sun, my sustenance. How many ways can I say I'm sorry?
Thanks so much for joining us on your now virtual book tour. It was great to see you. Great to talk to you.
Thank you so much. This was really fun, and it was really good to see both of you. I haven't seen either one of you in a long time, and I like it. I really like it. And this is a great podcast, and I'm very happy to be a part of it.
Thanks so much for joining us.
And we'll remind our listeners and watchers now to go out to your local bookstore and order a copy of Barn 8 and read it, because it is fantastic.
Or don't go out to your local bookstore.
Oh yeah, right.
Order the book. But we got to tell people to stay at home, man.
Never mind.